The biggest thing to come out of GDC this year is without a doubt ray tracing. If you're not familiar with the concept, ray tracing is a method to render images using a computer that aims to recreate the way that light works in real life. Namely, we see things because photons bounce off everything and then bounce back into our eyes, and hey, we see things. Ray tracing works by trying to emulate that, by calculating the path a ray of light would take from a source, bouncing on an object and then going towards the camera. Well, technically going everywhere and towards the camera. It is a great way to get photorealistic or near photorealistic images in computer graphics. It hasn't been all that used in video games because ray tracing is extremely intensive in terms of the calculations needed to achieve it. On the background, you're now seeing Quake 2 run using a ray trace renderer. All that static you see that sort of makes the scene not look as visible, that's not from the video encoding, that's how it's generated because there aren't enough rays being calculated to actually get it to look like a complete scene. Still, it looks goddamn impressive. I mean, look at the shadows, look at the way the light bounces off things. Those characters, those enemies, even though they're made with less polygons than the nose of the characters you find in games nowadays, they feel realistic, and the textures that are, again, probably the whole level in Quake 2 doesn't have enough texture data to cover a nose these days. It looks amazing. That is the power of ray tracing, of path tracing if you will. And it's running at about 50 frames a second max on a video card that costs about as much as your kidneys. And that's Quake 2. Apply the same renderer to a more modern game that has higher detail textures, that has other effects, it has shaders, it has a lot more intensive workloads for graphics, and you'll get what, 2 frames an hour maybe? There's been attempts to bring ray tracing to video games for a long time. It was especially big back when Intel was trying to make Larrabee. Man, remember Larrabee? It was going to be the shit. Like, it's gonna be a graphics card made out of x86 processor. It is gonna be so cool. They say it can do ray tracing. It couldn't actually, but Intel still tried to play up that angle to the point where they had this video of Wolfenstein 2009, the one that I honestly don't care for, running using ray tracing on a laptop, like on a 2009 or 2010 era laptop. Here's the thing that I didn't really clarify well with the video, at least in the title. It wasn't running per se on the laptop, so all those nifty reflections that, gotta be honest, the game looked like crap with ray tracing, but still, it was impressive. That was actually being run off-site on about 4 servers that were streaming the game to that laptop in real time. So the laptop was technically running it, much like I am now in your computer talking to you and you alone, and if you open the CD tray, my hand will come out and ask you for money. You know, I would if I could. Ray tracing wasn't possible back then, but it was nice to dream. It was nice to imagine that maybe one day it would be possible. We had, I think there were demos of Quake Wars as well, using ray tracing. There were demos of, I think even Quake 4, but it just wasn't feasible. There was not enough power in the hardware back then to render video games using ray tracing. John Carmack, I believe, said it around 2011 that he made a ray tracing engine that could pull around 60 frames a second in 720p with a static scene, but if you were to add stuff in it, you know, to actually render things like animations, movement, characters, it would just drop dead, because even though it was running at 60 frames a second, were it not rendered using ray tracing, it would have run at several thousand frames a second with rasterization, with the normal way. It was just not feasible, though the benefits, were it feasible, would have been amazing. I mean, just imagine it. Games where you no longer have to fake reflections, because all games right now kinda have to fake reflections. They basically just render out a mirror version of the space that's already in the game, or sometimes just put a transparent wall in front of you and just copy and paste all the assets from one side to another, the point where they're actually separate entities and you can get them to move around in different positions even though they're supposed to be reflections, but that's all that matter. It's hard doing reflections. That's why even games that look great, like Deus Ex Mankind Divided doesn't have any reflections. Ray tracing also handles light bounce, because light, let's face it, bounces. If you've got light bouncing on a green canvas, it will splash that color onto everything around it. That's natural. That's what you can do with ray tracing in a game without having to fake it, without having to put a static light filter on a different area than the wall that's being illuminated and the color is bounced off of. We can make things that look real, feel real. And we're getting close to having that. At GDC, three things were revealed. The first one is that Microsoft is working on, has worked on, and it's developed and it's kind of available, I guess, for the developers. They have developed the XR, which is DirectX ray tracing. It's a component of DirectX 12 that handles parts of ray tracing. It's not meant to do everything, and it's not meant to completely ray trace a scene, but it can do reflections, it can do ambient occlusions, it can do refractions, it can do shadows up to a point. It is meant to supplement normal ways in which video games are made. So you still have them working at usable frame rates, not as high as it would have had, were there no ray tracing, but with the added detail of ray tracing. Added to that, there came NVIDIA with their RTX technology. RTX is sort of their method by which the XR is implemented in the NVIDIA graphics technology. And part of it will be available for video games through GameWorks ray tracing. Probably not all of it, because RTX requires a specific kind of hardware. Well, the XR, like the DirectX ray tracing thing, is going to work on existing hardware, on hardware that supports DirectX 12. RTX won't. That is Volta specific, because currently RTX requires one element that you don't find in pretty much any commercial grade video card, and that is tensor cores. You know that fuzziness that was earlier on the Quake 2 video, that static? Yeah, that's gonna be visible in games where ray tracing is used a lot. But NVIDIA found a way to use the tensor cores in their high-end Volta video cards, the cores used for machine learning for AI, to teach an AI to fill in the gaps and do it fast enough so that a scene that would normally look like that Quake 2 video looks actually good. Here's an example of the implementation that Remedy is using in their engine. You can see that there is clear example of that static, of that insufficient amount of rays implemented in the scene. There's some detail missing there, and it's not being filled in because I'm not even sure actually on what hardware that's running. But in the NVIDIA presentation, they actually show you how the AI can absolutely denoise the thing, and it looks absolutely amazing, because you don't have to try and fill in the gaps to where shadows would be. Shadows will be generated where they should be. You won't get anomalies anymore. You won't get really crappy lighting effects. And honestly, really crappy lighting effects really burn my gizzard. They've been burning my gizzard for a long time, and I got really disappointed by games like Risen 2. They just have horrible lighting. I need to use filters to tone it down so that it doesn't look even worse. This just solves everything. You're gonna have actual lighting. And Metro Exodus is using global illumination via ray tracing. It's gonna be in the game. Not sure what performance impact it will have, but the light in the game, that's not gonna be faked. You're not gonna have areas that are always lit in a certain way, no matter how much light you shine or try to shine on them. It will be realistic. It will have a sense of believability, though it will come with a cost. Besides performance, everything else that isn't as realistic may seem a bit phony by comparison. But hey, that's a small price to pay in the way of progress. Now here's the big question. Is this thing gonna run on AMD hardware? Well, at GDC, AMD did announce their own ray tracing thing, but they did not show any actual footage from an implementation. Well, actually they did, but the only one they showed was for CAD type work, computer-aided design. So you can ray trace your engine block using Radeon rays or something like that, so it'll look a bit more realistic. There's gonna be an implementation for video games, they just didn't show it yet. And what's important here is that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that implementation, Radeon Rays 2.0, I think is what they called it, is going to be backed by Vulkan as well. So it'll work both on DirectX and Vulkan as well. well, and that's a very important difference compared to the DirectX implementation. Though I do believe that NVIDIA's implementation, RTX, will also work on Vulkan because it's the underlying hardware that's doing the job. It's built in there, or at least it's built into the software in the NVIDIA driver that can hook up to DXR, but can probably also hook up to something else. This will without a doubt cause a bit of a problem, because how compatible are they gonna be? Is NVIDIA's ray tracing going to work with AMD's ray tracing, or are developers gonna have to make two ray tracing engines, or at least two ray tracing paths for each of them? In which case you kind of realize that one of them's not gonna make the cut. It's like Tress Effects and Hairworks. It's gonna have one or the other, and NVIDIA's got more money, so it's probably gonna be NVIDIA's. But on the other hand, here's the important bit. Ray tracing requires a lot of math, and I mean a lot of extra math, a lot of it. And Radeon graphics cards are really good at certain types of math, you know, the crypto kind of math. Now, I'm just speculating here because I'm not familiar with the similarities between the calculations required for cryptocurrency and mining and for ray tracing. If they share any similarities, they have the same kind of data sets, same kind of numbers. But if they do, especially with the async compute where they can just shove things in where there's downtimes, Radeon cards may be a bit beefier for ray tracing than they would normally seem to be. I mean, you already have a benefit in DirectX 12 and Vulkan a bit, so ray tracing may not be a stretch. Though again, this is speculation on my part. I'm not familiar with the actual workloads or how they function on the video cards themselves. Nobody is, unless you downloaded the stuff of GitHub and started to code your own engine with ray tracing in it. If you are, please mention something in the comments, because I'd really love to pick your brain and know more about what your take on the implementation is. And lastly, you've seen this. This is the thing that's probably gonna get the channel banned because it's a Star Wars thing. Disney will behead us. It's not from a movie, but it may think it's from the movie. This is a scene rendered using RTX. This is as close to photorealistic as real time. That's real time Unreal Engine 4. That's as close to realism as games have ever gotten. Yeah, it's exaggerated with all the reflections and refractions and stuff, but it looks about as real as the movie did. Don't expect that to be video games. I mean, the ones we're playing. Do not expect it. That's running on 4 high-end workstation Volta cards that are worth over $10,000 each. That's not what games are gonna look like when the ray tracing goes live for everybody, which will be later this year. That's probably not what games are gonna look like next year or 2 years from now. We may start seeing a bit of an inkling after 3 years, when we're on the generation of video cards after this one. In 5 years, maybe, if you've got SLI, or if they do actually move away from the monolithic GPU to a more distributed kind of architecture, maybe then you'll see something like this on your system, if no wars break out until then. And if, you know, all the GPUs aren't bought up by the Chinese again with their hydroelectric plants that give them cheap electricity to mine Bitcoin. Why can't they just burn coal that costs a lot, or oil that kills the planet like everybody else? That's a different subject, and which I'll not get into right now. The important bit is that ray tracing is coming. It's not going to be full ray tracing, but it's going to be enough ray tracing so that games will start looking oh so sweet. And you can be damn sure that Bethesda is going to make a version of Skyrim that has ray tracing in it. I'm confident they'll be making those. Also, because Radeon Rays can technically work on Polaris, I think, you may see this functionality being ported to consoles as well in a limited set at first. And probably the next generation, the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox 2, spelled TU, will probably have a dedicated component for ray tracing, and maybe some tensor cores or some AI ASIC in there that will handle the defuzzinating of the image so it'll look a bit less fuzzy. Now all you have to do is wait and then prepare about 80 gigs of drive space just for taking pictures in video games because they're gonna look amazing, especially the car ones where you gotta face it, there's not a lot of graphics in car games. There's just the road, the cars, so they can really pump up the details. Those are gonna look so well, and someone needs to make a ray trace version of every Piranha Bytes game there is. Yeah, even Reason 2. Goodbye.